They don't ignore. You look closer. They still answer, just shorter. They still reply, just later. They still include you, just less. Nothing disappears. It fades slowly. And that is what confuses you because it feels normal. Nothing is clearly wrong, but something is off, and you feel it immediately, like something already shifted before you could react. And if you have ever felt this, comment this, because most people feel it but never understand what is actually happening behind it. And that is what makes it dangerous, because it keeps repeating without you even noticing it fully in your daily life. They used to ask you things, now they don't. They used to stay longer, now they leave faster. They used to be curious, now they just respond and move on. And you notice it immediately, but you cannot explain it because nothing obvious changed. They are still there, still talking, still responding, just not the same anymore. And that is what traps you, because you cannot react to something that was never said. And the more you think about it, the more confusing it becomes, because you feel the difference clearly, but you have no way to explain what is really happening. Conversations end earlier. Pauses feel longer, replies feel lighter. There is no depth anymore, no extension, no real engagement, just enough to keep it polite. And then it fades and you feel that shift immediately, like something invisible is limiting how far the interaction can go, and you start noticing it everywhere. Every conversation feels shorter. Every exchange feels weaker, and you begin questioning yourself, but nothing is clearly wrong, and that is what makes it worse, because you cannot fix something you cannot fully see. And most people stay stuck here without understanding what causes it. In groups, it becomes even clearer. They talk, you listen, you speak, they respond, but they do not build on what you said. They shift the topic, redirect the energy, continue without you. And it does not feel aggressive, it feels natural, like you are not part of the flow anymore, like your presence does not extend anything. And that is when it hits you, are there physically, but not included socially, and you feel it immediately, but you cannot explain it. And that confusion repeats every time, without you understanding why it keeps happening in the same pattern. Again, plans happen, you find out later, not because they hit it, but because they did not think of you. They mention it casually, like it made sense, and that is what hurts. Not rejection, but absence. You were not excluded, you were not considered, and that feels worse, because it means something changed in how they see you. Not enough to push you away, just enough to leave you out quietly. And you feel it immediately, but cannot explain why it keeps repeating in the same pattern over time, without any clear reason. When you speak, they listen, but they do not react the same. No curiosity, no follow-up, no energy, just acknowledgement, then silence. Like your words reached a wall and stopped there, and you feel that drop in connection immediately, but cannot explain it. And the strange part is you can feel it clearly, but you have no language to describe what is actually happening. And that is what makes it more frustrating, because you know something is different but cannot explain why it keeps happening again and again. They do not challenge you, they do not disagree, they do not engage deeply, they just accept and move on. And that feels strange, because agreement should feel like connection, but it feels like distance. Like they are not interested enough to go deeper, and you start realizing something is missing, but you cannot define what. And that uncertainty keeps growing every time the same pattern repeats without explanation, and you begin questioning your own presence, wondering if something about you changed, or if something was always there that you never fully understood before. Then you notice something else. They act differently with others. More energy, more presence, more attention, more curiosity. They stay longer, they react stronger, they engage deeper, and now it becomes clear it is not them. It is how they see you. They do not treat you differently, they treat you accordingly. And once that realization hits, everything changes. Because now you understand that something was decided before you even had a chance to show who you are. And most people never understand what actually causes that shift to happen. So you try to adjust. You try to be more present, more interesting, more precise, more aware of everything you say. You try to fix it, but nothing changes because they are not reacting to you. They are reacting to what they already decided you are, and that decision happened before you even noticed something was wrong. And that is why nothing you change seems to work, because you are trying to solve something that was never based on what you actually did. You were never ignored. You were downgraded quietly before you noticed. No moment, no explanation, no clear signal, just less attention, less curiosity, less effort, until it slowly turns into distance. But it is not distance. It is a decision, and you did not disappear. You became less important without realizing it. And once that happens, people stop investing in you without needing to explain anything. And that is what makes it harder to see, because nothing clearly tells you when it started. And the more you try to understand it, the more it feels like something is missing, that you cannot define. That is why it feels confusing. Because nothing is obvious, nothing is direct, nothing is clearly happening. But everything feels different, and you keep trying to understand what changed, without realizing the change did not happen in your actions. It happened in how they see you. And once that perception shifts, everything around you starts adjusting to it. And the worst part is most people experience this for years without ever understanding what is really happening underneath it. And that lack of understanding keeps them reacting to something they cannot fully recognize or explain clearly. This is not about what you did. It is about what they saw or what they believe they saw in you. And once that image forms, it stays, and everything begins to follow that version of you. Even when it is not accurate, even when it does not reflect who you really are, because perception moves faster than reality, and once it locks in, it rarely gets questioned again. And that is where everything begins to change without you realizing it. And you continue reacting to a version of yourself that was never fully real. Once you notice this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere in conversations, in groups, in reactions, in small details that you used to ignore because they seem too subtle to matter. But now everything connects, and it becomes impossible to unsee, because now you understand what is actually happening. And if this is starting to make sense, comment "I see it," because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And very few people ever reach this level of awareness. And that awareness changes how you interpret every interaction moving forward in ways you never expected before. Now everything starts making sense. Why things felt off before, why energy changed without explanation, why interactions slowly lost depth. And at the same time, you realize you never had the language to understand what was happening because you were experiencing something real without knowing what it actually was. And that is why it felt confusing for so long. And once you finally see it, clearly you begin to understand how often this has been happening in your life without you noticing. And that realization changes how you interpret everything around you from this point forward. And that is where it becomes even more important, because once someone sees you a certain way, they do not just treat you differently. They start expecting less from you over time, less presence, less value, less impact. And when expectations drop, behavior follows. And that changes everything slowly without you realizing it. And most people go their entire life feeling this pattern without ever understanding what is really happening or why it keeps repeating. And that is exactly what we break in the next video, because what happens next explains why people already expect less from you before you even speak, and once you see that, you will not be able to ignore it again.